I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, back at the Vatican. Pope Francis wraps up his 3-day trip to Hungary with Mass before thousands of pilgrims. We have a report from Budapest. Building allies. President Joe Biden welcomes the president of the Philippines to the White House amid mounting tension with China. May Day. New developments in the pushback in France against the change in the retirement age. And my son Carlo, the mother of a popular young blessed, shares the story of her son as she knew him. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker. Our top story tonight, for the third time in 2 months, a mid-sized U.S. bank has failed. This time, it is San Francisco-based First Republic Bank. It sold its deposits and most of its assets to J.P. Morgan Chase. This marks the second biggest bank failure in U.S. history. First Republic had struggled since the March collapse of 2 other financial institutions. Our President Joe Biden promotes U.S. small businesses today before hosting another world leader. He welcomed the head of the Philippines to the White House. The visit comes as the U.S. and its partners try to counter the growing influence of China. President Joe Biden greets Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. The two seek to strengthen security and keep the peace in the Pacific, where China is seen as a growing threat.
Mr. President, what is your message to China?
Earlier today, the president hosted another event at the White House focused on small businesses.
Small businesses are the engine of our economy, the glue. They really are the glue, the heart and soul of communities.
And he addressed another American bank failure, trying to reassure the country.
Regulators have taken action to facilitate the sale of First Republic Bank and ensure that all depositors are protected and the taxpayers are not on the hook.
But former Vice President Mike Pence criticizes President Biden, writing, "One more Biden bailout. We cannot borrow, spend, and bail our way back to a growing economy." The president is seeking re-election despite concerns about his age. He joked about it at this year's White House Correspondents Association dinner.
You say I'm ancient. I say I'm wise. You say I'm over the hill. Don Lemon would say that's a man in his prime.
Since President Joe Biden took office, up to 5.5 million people have illegally crossed the southern border. That is according to Border Patrol data, and more than 1 million of them have evaded authorities. House Republicans are now rolling out what they say is a major immigration reform bill, part of their Commitment to America agenda. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the details. Eric?
Well, good evening, Tracy. New Republicans have put the blame of the border crisis squarely on the shoulders of President Joe Biden. He's not only canceled dozens of border policies, but also including the Trump-era Title 42, which was started during COVID, but is set to expire next Thursday. Now, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says that law enforcement is ready for the surge, but even he admits that he could see somewhere between 10,000 people per day.
Let me be clear. Our border is not open and will not be open after May 11th.
But Republicans claim the border is not secure. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise says Republicans intend to pass the strongest border security package Congress has ever taken up.
And when we return in May, the same week that Title 42 expires, we're going to bring a border security package and pass it through this House of Representatives. And we challenge President Biden to work with us to solve this problem. We're going to show the president how to solve the problem.
Every single thing Alejandro Mayorkas is doing is to speed more people into this country. You take a look at his budget. It's intentional. They cut CBP and put billions more into a contingency fund to bring more people into the country.
The GOP bill combines measures from several committees. It increases penalties for individuals who overstay their visas, overhauls the asylum system, completes over 900 miles of border wall construction. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Mike McCall says there's more.
We'll reinstate Remain in Mexico. It will reinstate the migrant protection protocols. and the asylum claim laws with Central America so we can shut this thing down.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries tells me all Republicans want to do is keep migrants out of the U.S.
In terms of the extreme MAGA Republican plan on immigration, that's just another dead on arrival bill catering to the far right extreme of the Republican Party.
And by the way, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops supports the Biden administration's initiatives for humane immigration reform, but they say that they must do more in order to lift the restrictions on asylum, eligibility, and access. The House will take up the issue next week. Tracy?
Well, Eric, I understand there has been some new developments about who was responsible for the Supreme Court leak of the Dobbs draft decision, which occurred on May 2nd, 2022, 1 year ago tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Justice Samuel Alito actually told the Wall Street Journal on Friday that he has, quote, a pretty good idea of who was behind it for the unprecedented disclosure of the leaked draft opinion regarding Roe. Now, he wouldn't say exactly who the person was, but he did dismiss the idea that it was any one of the conservative justices that were behind it. As we know, this leaked draft put many of the conservative justices in danger. A man was even arrested for attempted murder outside the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Now, despite all that, listen to this. The Politico reporter that actually published this leaked draft, well, he actually received an award from President Biden himself at this weekend's White House Correspondents' Dinner. Tracy?
All right, Eric, thank you so much reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. All right, we go now to Mary Margaret Olahan, senior reporter at the Daily Signal. Mary Margaret, great to be with you as always. A lot to get to today, but first, as you heard from Eric, Justice Samuel Alito is now saying that he has a pretty good idea of who was behind that leak. I know that you have been following this from the very start. I want to get your thoughts on all this, and are you surprised?
I'm not surprised, Tracy. No, and it's good to be here. So Justice Alito, he thinks that he knows who this Dobbs leaker was, who leaked the draft opinion showing that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. Now, that leaker leaked to Politico, and that leak resulted in months of protesting outside the Supreme Court and protesting outside the homes of the justices. Alito says that he thinks it was done in order to intimidate the justices and to cause all this mass panic, and it did. It actually resulted in someone traveling across the country from California to Maryland to kill Kavanaugh in his home while he was sleeping. Just so insidious. We also know that there were extremist groups that piggybacked off this leak. They published the addresses of the justices online. They firebombed pro-life pregnancy centers and Catholic churches across the country. All of this happened, and yet we haven't identified who this Dobbs leaker is. Now, Alito says he doesn't think they have enough information to actually firmly establish who the leaker is, though he believes he knows who it is. We don't know. And yet, as ongoing protests are going on outside the homes of the justices, the Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals aren't enforcing 18 U.S. Code 1507, which says that you cannot protest in such a manner outside the home of a justice in order to change how they are going to rule. And that is exactly what we saw all last summer as we waited for this Dobbs opinion.
Yeah, meantime, something else I want to get your thoughts on that Eric also mentioned. You know, on Saturday, the Politico reporters who published the leaked opinion, well, they were given the prestigious Katharine Graham Award for Courage and Accountability at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, that dinner is a complete and total joke. But second of all, that award that was given to them and when they received it, they made no bones about the fact that they were aware of the political ramifications of publishing such a story. They even made comments that seemed to be that they were aware of the fact that it could potentially delay the overturn of Roe v. Wade, impact the justice's decision. So it's a joke, Tracy. They knew what they were doing. They knew the ramifications of this story. It had huge ramifications. We saw the protesting that followed. We saw an assassination attempt that followed. We still see ongoing protesting. Justice Alito couldn't even go in person to give those remarks at George Mason University. He had to deliver them from the Supreme Court in a private room because of the security risks. So this is not over, it's ongoing. And we've seen very little done to sufficiently protect the justices in these cases.
We have a little over a minute left, Mary Margaret, but I want to talk about a story that you have out today with the Daily Signal about Republican Senator James Lankford and the abortion drugs. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Senator James Lankford, the Daily Signal was able to first look at this podcast episode that he did with Dr. Donna Harrison, who's at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and with Eric Baptist, who's with Alliance Defending Freedom. And they broke down the ramifications of these abortion drugs and the fact that the FDA has now made it under the Biden administration so that women can get these abortion drugs by mail without ever having seen a doctor. And this is wild to me because I've been reporting on this for a couple years. And I remember when the FDA had these risk mitigation evaluation REMS, they call them, in place so that women were protected from abortion pills. Before you got one, you were supposed to consult with a doctor. There were a couple different barriers in place to protect women. Now you get them by mail. And in some cases, the first drug is intended to kill the baby, and the second drug is intended to help the mother deliver the baby. But when this is happening at home without a doctor, often the women don't know how far along in the pregnancy they are. And in this case, if the baby is past a certain point, that can be very seriously dangerous for the mother. And yet we have all these advocates and lawmakers saying this is pro-woman, this is helping them. We need more abortions after Roe. It's a very anti-woman, anti-informed consent process that we have going on here. And so this was it was an interesting podcast episode where these pro-life experts break down what's going on with the abortion drugs. And Senator Lankford, kudos to him for drawing attention to it, because there's very little lawmakers right now who are willing to discuss this with candor and actually get into the facts of what these abortion drugs entail. I think they call it an abortion drug cocktail. That's a good way to describe it. And we need to be talking about it more.
Yeah, and we're glad that you are. So thank you so much, Mary Margaret. Great to be with you as always.
Thanks so much for having me.
Pope Francis is back in Rome following his 3-day trip to Hungary. The visit included a mass in Budapest before 50,000 people. During the Mass, the Holy Father reminded the faithful that Jesus is the shepherd who searches non-stop for lost sheep to bring them back into the fold. The Mass wrapped up the Holy Father's 3-day trip where he met with Hungarian leaders, including Prime Minister Viktor Orban. We go now to Budapest with Céline Tadier, European correspondent for the National Catholic Register. Céline, great to be with you. I know that you were covering the Holy Father's trip in Hungary. If you don't mind, talk to us about some of the highlights from this apostolic visit.
Well, what I can say, Tracy, is that this apostolic trip in Hungary had many different aspects. The Pope was introduced to the Hungarian society as a whole across generations and backgrounds. He met with, of course, the main political leaders, such as the President, Katalin Novak, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban, as well as the mayor of Budapest, who is a member of the opposition. But he also met with a lot of Christian representatives from different denominations, including with the Orthodox Metropolitan Ilarion of Budapest. He's meeting with thousands of young people during the day on Saturday, with thousands of young people coming from across Hungary was a particular success. It was such an highlight during the trip. It aroused a lot of enthusiasm. What is noticeable is that the welcoming of migrants was the main issue reported in the international press, as indeed the Pope insisted a lot on the need to keep doors open to others, repeatedly, but more specifically during his homily on Sunday morning in front of the Hungarian parliament, which was attended, by the way, by hundreds of thousands of faithful. It was a beautiful moment under the sun, a very nice moment. But yet many other major topics were at the heart of the discussions and sometimes underreported, but were very important.
And Céline, I also understand that the Holy Father also held his usual news conference on the papal plane going back to Rome. And again, he specifically during this time talked about the war in Ukraine and also mentioned those allegations that children were being kidnapped by Russians. Can you talk to us more about that?
Yes, exactly. So during the usual press conference on the plane, the Pope said that he was willing to do whatever it takes, whatever in his power to help promote peace in Ukraine. And so indeed, like you said, he mentioned a special mission that he will try to carry out, and that is to help bringing deposed Ukrainian children back from Russia. because it was requested by the Prime Minister, the Ukrainian Prime Minister that he met on April 27, right before going to Budapest. So it was the main request that was formulated. And so that's the special mission that he's going to try to carry out. And he claimed that in the past, the Holy See has been successfully an intermediary in some other very difficult situations, such as in the case of exchange of prisoners. And all of their attempts were a success, according to him. So the Pope explained that indeed most of the time it is more a problem of humanity before being merely a problem of war, and that all human gestures can help. So that's what makes the Holy See, a reliable intermediary in this context, in his view.
And quickly, before I let you go, Celine, I understand the Holy Father also mentioned something about the next places he's planning to visit. What more can you tell us about that? What did he say?
Yes, the Pope mentioned some of his upcoming trips. He precised that no trip would be cancelled for the time being, despite his recent health issues that indeed was a source of concern for the faithful worldwide. So he confirmed that he will go to Lisbon for the World Youth Day in Portugal, so at the beginning of August. He also reaffirmed his intention to go to Marseille in southern France, probably on September 23rd, to attend the conclusion of the Mediterranean meetings. And finally, he also stated that he will go to Mongolia, probably in late August, although it was supposed to be in September. It's still a little bit unclear. It's still to be confirmed, but that is the main program right now.
Oh, Celine, thank you so much for this report. We appreciate it so much. Celine Tadia, European correspondent for the National Catholic Register. Thank you again. Great to be with you. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including the war in Ukraine, new developments in the conflict that has lasted more than 1 year, and a new chapter, a closer look at the project from the mother of Blessed Carlo Acutis. Ceasefire in Sudan has been extended for 3 days, but clashes continue in the northeast African country, and civilians are doing their best to flee the violence.
Do you feel relieved?
Yeah, a lot.
I'm sorry for what you've been through.
Well, the international community has been calling for the safe transfer of civilians, adding that despite the truce, clashes on the ground continue. Over the weekend, the United States conducted its first evacuation of around 300 American citizens.
The French unions here today, I think they're an inspiration to working people across Europe.
And in France, thousands marched in May Day demonstrations to protest President Emmanuel Macron's move to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. The majority of protests were peaceful. However, 22 people were detained after a bank and other property was vandalized. At least 34 people are injured after Russia launched missiles towards a city in eastern Ukraine today. This as officials in Ukraine say they are planning a spring counteroffensive in the more than 1 year-long conflict.
Те, що ми будемо йти вперед і деокуповувати.
Ukraine's leader says that his military will not wait for the delivery of new military equipment. This as a leading Russian general says the United States is only seeking to prolong the war by providing weapons and financial assistance to Ukraine. And joining us now in the studio is John Elliott, managing partner for Brighton Strategy Group and former chief spokesman for the National Security Council. John, great to be with you again.
It's great to be here, Tracy. Thank you very much.
So, John, let's talk about this. What do you make of Ukraine pushing forward with the spring offensive, especially in light of these missile attacks by Russia?
Well, it's hard to tell when or if the actual Ukraine mission or the Ukraine offensive has started or when it will start, because you've had actually just today you had this attack that you mentioned by the Russian, an air attack that really resulted in some casualties on the Ukraine side. And so there's a big question about how the Ukraine forces will actually fare in their spring offensive, because there's been a lot of talk. It's very tough to tell what the capabilities, and we'll see when this offensive gets underway, but hard to tell before it starts what the real capabilities when the forces actually go against each other, because right now it's really kind of air attacks, et cetera. There's not a lot of ground, there's at least not a big ground push by the Ukrainians yet, so we'll see. One thing I should say on that, Tracy, is that the leaked intelligence that we had from the airman up in the Air National Guard in Massachusetts, the huge trove of intelligence that he posted and about 100 documents, a lot of those said in classified materials that the Ukrainians are not really as capable as the spin has been from this administration. So it's a little bit of a double speak when the administration is telling us how capable the Ukrainians are and exactly what they're saying behind closed doors, according to these documents, if you believe the documents are real, and most do. So the question is, we're now going to see what the actual answer is there, whether the Ukrainian forces are capable and are able to really make great advances against the Russians.
Yeah, another thing I want to touch on quickly is that, as you know, the United States recently announced that it was giving, I think, about $325 million more in weapons and equipment to the Ukrainians. Do you think that'll be enough? And then also, what does that do to us when it comes to our military preparedness?
Well, it's a great question, Tracy. The idea that we're now going to be putting another $350 million into this conflict. Right now, if you just take a step back, we've spent over $130 billion on this conflict. And if you look at what the others in NATO are contributing, really it's not over $10 billion for those countries. In most cases, it's far less than that. So in other words, the U.S. taxpayer is bankrolling this Ukrainian offensive or this Ukrainian response to the Russian offensive. And look, we all feel bad for Ukraine. This is something totally unprovoked. Nobody's a fan of the Russian forces and what they're doing at all whatsoever. But there's a real question at least from a lot of Republicans, about how long are we going to finance this war? And if you take a look at what $130 billion would fund in terms of what we could do against China, there's a lot of feeling that we've taken our eye off the ball, both financially and strategically, in focusing so much on Ukraine.
John, we probably have a minute or so left. I want to talk about what's happening here at home. Coming up next week, Title 42 is expected to expire. It's anticipated that about 10,000 migrants a day are going to be coming through our border, and we're also learning that many of them are Chinese nationals. What do you make of this?
Well, look, the border is a disaster, and it has been for the last 2.5 years. The border was under control under President Trump. When President Biden came in office, there was a lot of pressure on him from his left to really just leave the border open and allow these immigrants to come in. You raise it, and so now it's going to get even worse with this change in the title that's coming up. But when you look at the number of Chinese that are coming in, you already had a lot of fentanyl coming across. So the Chinese are really contributing a lot to, not only in terms of the immigration, they're obviously the main people who are coming across are from Latin America, but in terms of the non-Latin American people who are coming over the border, the Chinese are now in the front place on that. And so what it means is, what are they up to? We saw the spy balloon. We saw now a bunch of Chinese coming in, really ramping up their involvement here. So the question right now is really, what are they up to? And is this a real problem for our national security? Most of us would say absolutely.
Yeah, certainly more questions than answers.
Absolutely.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. John, thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Tracy. It's always good to be on.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, pro-life initiative, how more than 600 babies were saved from abortion during the Lenten season. Plus, work hard, pray hard. We celebrate the feast day of the patron of workers. According to a new report, a pro-life initiative saved nearly 700 babies in just the Lenten season. 40 Days for Life says its global Lenten campaign saved 680 babies this year. The pro-life group says they have now saved more than 23,000 babies since the initiative began in 2007. Additionally, 2 abortion businesses were closed during the liturgical season of Lent, and 3 pro-abortion workers converted to pro-life causes. The mother of a young blessed has written a biography sharing the life of her son from her point of view. Blessed Carlos Acutis was best known for documenting Eucharistic miracles around the world. He was beatified in 2020. Antonio Salzana Acutis shares her personal stories and memories with her son in the new book, My Son Carlo. She includes her experience during Carlo's final days before his death. The book is available online for purchase. And for more on this story and other news, visit our sister publication, the National Catholic Register, at ncregister.com. Well, finally tonight, as we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, today is the feast of St. Joseph the Worker. St. Joseph is one of the few figures in church history to have two feast days. We also celebrate him on March 19th. Pope Pius XII inaugurated today's feast in the 1950s, in part as a response to communism and its famed May Day parades. It also highlights St. Joseph's work as a carpenter and the Christian meaning of working hard in our daily lives. We thank you for watching tonight, and remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night, and God bless.